My name is Catherine, and at 67 years old, I thought I had experienced all the heartbreak life could offer. After losing Frank, my husband of 35 years, I kept his prized Rolex displayed in our bedroom. It was his most treasured possession. Last month, I discovered it missing. When confronted, my son Jason casually admitted I already sold it. I needed money for my trip to Europe. Devastated, I tracked down the pawn shop to see it one last time. The owner looked at me strangely and said, "Ma'am, there's something you need to see inside this watch. If you're watching this, drop a comment telling me where you're from and hit subscribe to hear what I discovered that changed everything." I spent most of my adult life as an elementary school teacher in Portland. For 35 years, I taught 3rd grade at Lincoln Elementary, finding joy in watching young minds blossom. Teaching wasn't just my career, it was my calling. But the real constant in my life was Frank, my high school sweetheart, who became my husband. We met in chemistry class junior year. Frank accidentally knocked over my beaker while trying to catch his pencil before it rolled off the table. Instead of saving his pencil, he ruined my experiment and spilled blue solution all over my new white shoes. He was so mortified that he offered to clean them for me after school. I said no to that, but yes to his nervous invitation for ice cream instead. That afternoon at Dais's ice cream parlor downtown started a love story that lasted over 4 decades. Our life together was modest but deeply satisfying. We bought our small 3-bedroom house in the suburbs of Portland a year after we married. It needed work back then, but Frank was handy with tools and patient with renovations. Together, we transformed it into a home, one project at a time. Frank would often joke that he could fix anything except my terrible cooking, which was unfortunately true. I could burn water, as he liked to tease. We raised 2 children in that house. Laura, our daughter, was born 2 years into our marriage. She was always the responsible one, studious and careful, so much like her father in temperament. Jason came 5 years later, bringing a whirlwind of energy and enthusiasm that both delighted and exhausted us. Where Laura was methodical, Jason was spontaneous. Where she planned, he improvised. Frank adored both of them fiercely, but he and Jason shared a special bond through their love of baseball and fishing trips. Frank worked as a mechanical engineer at Pacific Northwest Engineering for his entire career, 40 years at the same company, moving slowly but steadily up the ranks. He wasn't ambitious for titles or corner offices, but he took immense pride in his work. He designed components for bridges and buildings that would last for generations. "Good engineering isn't flashy, Catherine," he would tell me. "It's invisible. When I do my job right, nobody notices because everything just works like it should." When Pacific Northwest Engineering awarded Frank his 25-year service award, they gave him a Rolex Submariner. It was far more extravagant than anything we would have purchased for ourselves. At first, Frank was almost embarrassed by it, keeping it in its box. "It's too fancy for fixing the lawnmower head," say with a chuckle. But I encouraged him to wear it. After all, he had earned it through decades of dedicated work. Eventually, that watch became part of him. He wore it to Laura's college graduation, to Jason's high school baseball championship, to our 30th anniversary dinner. It marked the milestones of our family life together. It was on his wrist as he walked Laura down the aisle at her wedding, and when he held each of our 3 grandchildren for the first time. That Rolex was never just a timepiece to Frank. It represented his life's work, his reliability, his constancy. When Frank died 3 years ago, it was sudden and unexpected. A massive heart attack while he was out for his morning walk. One minute he was alive, planning our weekend trip to the coast, and the next minute he was gone. The doctors said it was quick, that he wouldn't have suffered much. That was supposed to be comforting, I think, but nothing about losing your partner of 35 years can truly be comforted away. The grief was overwhelming at first. I couldn't sleep in our bed for weeks, camping instead on the living room sofa surrounded by photo albums. Laura was my rock during those early days. She lives in Seattle with her husband Tom and their kids, about a 3-hour drive away. Despite having her hands full with 3 children under 10, she called me every single day and drove down every other weekend. She helped me navigate the maze of paperwork that follows a death, sat with me through the endless procession of well-meaning visitors, and held me when the waves of grief became too much to bear alone. Jason took his father's death differently. He had moved to Chicago after college, working in sales for a tech company. His marriage to Melissa had already been struggling, and Frank's death seemed to push it over the edge. 6 months after we lost, Frank, Jason, and Melissa divorced. With nowhere else to go and feeling adrift, Jason asked if he could move back home temporarily. Of course I said yes. The house felt too empty anyway, and I thought having my son close might help us both heal. Jason took over the basement, converting it into a makeshift apartment. He found a job at a local marketing firm, but it was clear his heart wasn't in it. He went through the motions, but the spark that had always defined him seemed dimmed. For almost 2 years we existed in a kind of holding pattern. Jason went to work, came home, watched television, slept, and repeated the cycle. I tried gently encouraging him to reconnect with old friends, or pursue the photography hobby he had enjoyed in college, but he always had excuses ready. Too tired. Maybe next week. Not interested anymore. Then about 4 months ago, something changed. I came home from my book club to find Jason at the dining room table surrounded by travel brochures and his laptop. For the first time in ages, his eyes held excitement. He was researching a trip to Europe. "I need to get out of Portland, Mom," he explained. "Dad always talked about wanting to see Europe, especially Italy. Remember how he used to say he wanted to see the engineering of the Roman aqueducts and the Renaissance architecture?" I did remember. Frank had always been fascinated by great feats of engineering and construction. We had planned to travel after my retirement, but time ran out before we got the chance. Thinking 3 weeks, Jason continued. Rome, Florence, Venice, then up to Paris and London. I felt a mix of emotions. On one hand, I was thrilled to see Jason passionate about something again. This felt like the first real sign of him emerging from grief. On the other hand, I worried about the cost. Jason wasn't making much at his marketing job, and I knew he still had student loans to pay off. "It sounds wonderful, honey," I said carefully. "Have you worked out how much it will cost?" Jason brushed off my concern. "I'll figure it out, Mom. I have some savings, and this is important. Dad never got to go, but I can go for both of us." Looking back, I should have pressed harder about the finances, but I was so grateful to see the return of his enthusiasm that I chose to believe he had a plan. When he showed me pictures of the Colosseum in St. Peter's Basilica, talking animatedly about what Frank would have appreciated about their design, I felt a warm connection to my late husband. Through Jason, perhaps a piece of Frank's dreams could still come true. Over the next few weeks, Jason spent every evening planning his European adventure. He booked flights, reserved hotels, researched tours, and created detailed itineraries. I helped where I could, offering to drive him to the airport and water his plants while he was away. It felt good to see him looking forward instead of dwelling in the past. "Dad would be happy about this, right, Mom?" he asked me one evening as we reviewed his plans. "Yes," I answered truthfully. "Your father always wanted you to experience the world. He would be so proud to see you doing this." What I didn't realize then was how drastically our lives were about to change, and how that Rolex sitting quietly in its display case in my bedroom would become the catalyst. The morning I discovered the Rolex was missing started like any other. I had my usual routine: wake up at 6:30, make coffee, water the plants on the back porch, and dust Frank's display case. Frank had built the small wooden case himself, with a glass top and a navy blue velvet lining. Inside, he kept his service medals from the National Guard, his father's pocket watch, and of course the Rolex. That morning I approached the case with my dusting cloth as usual. At first my mind didn't register what my eyes were seeing. The case looked wrong somehow. It took a moment to realize why the Rolex was gone. I blinked several times, certain I must be mistaken. Perhaps I had moved it while cleaning yesterday. But no, I hadn't opened the case in weeks. I carefully lifted the glass top and ran my fingers over the empty depression in the velvet where the watch normally sat, as if it might somehow be invisible rather than missing. A cold feeling settled in my stomach as I began searching the bedroom. Under the bed, in my jewelry box, on the bathroom counter. With each empty location, my movements became more frantic. I checked places that made no sense: the freezer, the laundry hamper, inside my rain boots. After 30 minutes of increasingly desperate searching, I moved to Frank's office, a small room Wed preserved exactly as he left it. His engineering books still lined the shelves, his favorite coffee mug still sat on the coaster on his desk. But as soon as I entered, I noticed that things had been disturbed here too. The drawer of his desk was slightly open, and when I pulled it out further, I could see that the small keepsake box where he stored special family mementos had been moved. With trembling hands, I opened the box. The photos of the children were still there, as was our wedding band, but some of the small items, coins, and trinkets that Frank had collected during his life seemed to be missing or rearranged. Jason had left for work early that morning. He usually didn't return until after 6 in the evening. The hours of waiting were excruciating. I tried to focus on grading papers for the adult education class I taught part-time at the community center, but I couldn't concentrate. My mind kept replaying possibilities, each worse than the last. Had we been robbed? Had I somehow misplaced the watch myself? Was I losing my memory? At 4:30, I heard the front door open. Jason was home early. I rushed from the kitchen to meet him in the entryway. "Jason, thank goodness you're home," I said, the words tumbling out. "Frank's Rolex is missing from the display case, and I think some other things from his office might be gone too. We should call the police." Jason set down his messenger bag and didn't meet my eyes. That was when I knew. Before he said a word, I knew. "About that, Mom," he said, his voice unnaturally casual. "I needed some extra cash for the trip. The flights ended up costing more than I expected." "What are you saying?" I asked, though I already understood perfectly. "I sold Dad's watch," he said with a small shrug. "It's not like he was using it anymore. It was just sitting there collecting dust." The room seemed to tilt around me. I reached for the wall to steady myself. "You sold your father's watch without asking me. How could you do that?" Jason's face hardened. "I don't need your permission. Dad would have wanted me to use it. He always said he'd rather have experiences than things." "Not that watch," I said, my voice rising. "That watch meant everything to him. It represented 30 years of his career, his dedication to providing for this family." "It's just a watch, Mom," Jason countered, his tone taking on the dismissive quality that had become too familiar since his divorce. "An object. Dad is gone and he doesn't care about material possessions anymore. It's not yours to decide." I felt tears welling up, but fought them back. That watch was meant to stay in the family, to be passed down. You had no right. "I needed the money," Jason repeated stubbornly. "The trip is important to me. Isn't that what you said Dad would want for me to experience the world?" "Not like this," I whispered. "Never like this." "You're overreacting," Jason said, picking up his bag again and heading toward the basement door. "It's just an old watch. Let it go." But I couldn't let it go. That watch was one of the few tangible connections I had left to Frank. I'd sometimes hold it, feeling its weight and remembering how it looked on his wrist. The thought of it being sold to a stranger was unbearable. "Where did you sell it?" I demanded. "Which store?" Jason paused at the basement door. "Why does it matter? It's done." "It matters to me," I insisted. We argued for nearly 30 minutes. The conversation spiraled beyond the watch, dredging up old disappointments and resentments. I brought up Jason's pattern of irresponsibility with money. He countered by accusing me of living in the past, of turning Frank into a saint in death. Words were said that shouldn't have been, wounds reopened that had barely begun to heal. "You know what, I can't do this right now," Jason finally snapped. "I'm going to Trevor's for a few days. You clearly need some space." Trevor was an old high school friend of Jason's who lived nearby. Before I could respond, Jason disappeared downstairs. 10 minutes later, he emerged with a hastily packed overnight bag and left without another word. The house felt cavernous after he left. I wandered from room to room, eventually finding myself sitting on the edge of our bed, Frank and mine. How had we gotten here? How had the sweet little boy, who used to bring me dandelion bouquets, turned into someone who could sell his father's prized possession without a second thought? I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Frank on our 30th anniversary. He had taken me to River's Edge, the fancy restaurant downtown where we could barely afford to eat. He had worn his good suit, the navy blue one reserved for special occasions, and the Rolex caught the candlelight as he reached across the table to hold my hand. 30 years with you, Catherine Head said, and I still feel like the luckiest man alive. Now that watch was gone, sold to a stranger who couldn't possibly understand its true value. Not the monetary value, but the worth of the memories it held, the life it had witnessed. I felt like I'd lost a piece of Frank all over again. For 2 days, Jason stayed away. No calls, no texts, just silence. I left him several voicemails, my tone softening with each one. By the third message, I was no longer asking about the watch, but simply wanted to know if he was okay. Still nothing. During those quiet days alone in the house, I found myself drawn to Jason's room in the basement. I hadn't been down there much since Head moved back home, respecting his privacy as an adult. But now, driven by a need to understand, I descended the stairs. The basement had been converted into a comfortable living space years ago when the kids were teenagers. Jason had made it his own since moving back with a small television, a desk for his laptop and shelves filled with sports memorabilia and books. It wasn't particularly messy, but it had the lived-in look of someone who wasn't invested in creating a permanent home. On his desk, I found the travel brochures He'd been so excited about. Flipping through them, I noticed something I hadn't before. These weren't budget accommodations or backpacker hostels. The hotels Jason had circled were luxury properties with infinity pools and panoramic views. The tours weren't general walking tours, but private guides and exclusive experiences. No wonder he needed extra money. A folder labeled Europe Trip contained printouts of his itinerary. 5-star hotels in Rome, first-class train tickets between cities, dinner reservations at Michelin-starred restaurants. This wasn't just a trip to connect with his father's unfulfilled dreams. This was extravagance, an escape. Tucked behind the travel documents, I found several credit card statements. My hands trembled as I read the numbers. Jason was far deeper in debt than I'd realized. Thousands of dollars spread across 3 different cards, minimum payments barely made each month. No wonder he had been desperate for cash. The trip wasn't just about finding purpose or honoring Frank. It was running away from problems that would only be worse when he returned. I sat heavily on his bed, the papers clutched in my hand, a new layer of hurt settling over me. Why hadn't he come to me? I would have helped him figure out his finances, perhaps loaned him money for a more modest trip. Instead, He'd chosen to sell one of our family's most precious keepsakes. On the 3rd day, Jason returned briefly to gather more clothes. I was in the garden when I heard him enter. By the time I made it inside, he was already packing a larger suitcase. "You're leaving?" I asked from the doorway of his room. Jason didn't look up from his packing. "My flight is in 3 days. I'm going to stay at Trevor's until then. Seems easier for everyone." "Jason, please," I said, stepping into the room. "We need to talk about this. About the watch, about your finances. I found your credit card statements." His head snapped up. "You went through my things? Seriously, Mom?" "I was trying to understand," I said, refusing to be derailed. "You should have told me you were struggling with money. We could have figured something out together." "There's nothing to figure out," he said, zipping his suitcase with unnecessary force. "I handled it." "By selling your father's watch, without asking, that's handling it." "I don't need another lecture," Jason said. "This trip is important to me. I need to get away, clear my head." "Can you at least tell me where you sold the watch?" I asked. "Which shop? I just want to see it one more time before it's gone forever." Jason sighed heavily as if my request was an unreasonable burden. "Thompson's Pawn downtown on Jefferson Street." "But Mom, seriously, let it go. It's just going to make you feel worse." "When are you coming back from Europe?" I asked, suddenly realizing I didn't even know. 3 weeks, maybe 4 if I decide to extend," he said, checking his phone rather than looking at me. "I'll figure it out as I go." I took a deep breath. "Jason, I want you to reconsider this trip right now. You're running from your problems, not towards solutions. Let me help you with your finances. We can plan a trip together later when you're on more solid ground." His expression hardened. "You don't understand. I need to get away from all this." The way he gestured vaguely around encompassed more than just the basement, more than just the house. It included me the memories of Frank, the weight of grief and expectations. All this was his entire life, and he wanted escape. "Running away won't fix what's broken," I said softly. "Neither will staying here," he countered, brushing past me with his suitcase. I followed him up the stairs. "Jason, please. If not for me, then for your father. He would want—" "Dad is gone." Jason interrupted, whirling to face me at the top of the stairs. "He doesn't want anything anymore, and I'm tired of everyone telling me what he would have wanted. You don't know. I don't know. Nobody knows because he's not here." With that, he turned and walked out the front door. No goodbye, no promise to call when he landed safely in Rome. Just the sound of his car starting and then silence. I stood in the doorway watching his taillights disappear down the street, feeling hollowed out. How had the loss of a watch uncovered so much brokenness between us? It wasn't about the Rolex. Not really. It was about respect, about memory, about how we honor those we've lost, and those still here. That evening, while cleaning the kitchen to keep my hands busy, I found a crumpled receipt that had fallen behind the trash can. It was from Thompson's pawn, dated 2 weeks earlier. Jason had sold the watch for $3,000, far below its actual value. At the bottom was a transaction number and a policy note items held for 30 days before resale. My heart skipped. If the pawn shop held items for 30 days, the watch might still be there. It hadn't been 2 weeks yet. Maybe, just maybe, I could see it one last time. Or if I could gather enough money, perhaps even buy it back. A small flame of hope kindled in my chest. Tomorrow I would visit Thompson's pawn. The following morning dawned gray and drizzly, typical Portland spring weather. I dressed carefully in my good wool coat and the pearl earrings Frank had given me for our 25th anniversary. If I was going to a pawn shop to inquire about an expensive watch, I wanted to look respectable, not desperate. Thompson's pawn was located in an older part of downtown, wedged between an artisanal coffee shop and a vintage clothing store. The gentrification of the neighborhood had clearly reached this block, but Thompson's maintained an old-fashioned storefront with a simple sign and displays of musical instruments and electronics in the windows. I had never been inside a pawn shop before. In my 67 years, I'd never had reason to. As I pushed open the heavy door, a small bell jingled overhead. I half expected a dingy, cluttered space like the pawn shops on television crime shows. Instead, I found a clean, well-organized store with glass display cases and items neatly arranged by category. Classical music played softly in the background. Mozart, I thought. Behind the counter stood an older gentleman with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He looked up from his computer and smiled warmly. "Good morning," he greeted me. "Welcome to Thompson's. I'm Albert Thompson. How can I help you today?" His kindness immediately put me at ease. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson. My name is Catherine Miller. I'm here about a Rolex watch that was sold to your shop about 2 weeks ago." Albert's smile faded slightly. "Ah, I see. Are you looking to purchase a Rolex? We do have several models in our jewelry case." "No," I said, opening my purse to retrieve a photograph. "I'm looking for a specific watch. This one." I placed the photo on the counter. It showed Frank on our last anniversary, his arm around me, the Rolex clearly visible on his wrist. My son sold it recently. It belonged to my late husband. Albert studied the photograph, recognition dawning in his eyes. "Yes, I remember this transaction. A Submariner from the late 90s, excellent condition." My breath caught. "Do you still have it? I know you have a 30-day holding period." Albert looked at me with newfound interest. "You say this was your husband's watch, and your son sold it." I nodded, feeling a flush of embarrassment. What must this man think of our family? "May I ask why you're looking for it?" Albert asked, his tone gentle but probing. Something about his kind eyes and attentive manner broke through my reserve. Before I knew it, I was telling him everything. About Frank, about the watch being his service award, about Jason selling it for his European trip, about our argument. "He doesn't understand what it meant." I finished, wiping away an errant tear. "It's not just a watch. It's a piece of my husband, of our life together." Albert nodded thoughtfully. "Mrs. Miller, would you mind waiting here for a moment? I need to check something in our safe." He disappeared into a back room, leaving me standing nervously at the counter. Through the display case, I could see various watches, but none was Frank's. Had it already been sold? Had I come too late? After what felt like an eternity, Albert returned, holding a familiar box. My heart leapt at the sight of it. "Is this the watch?" he asked, opening the box to reveal Frank's Rolex. "Yes," I whispered, reaching out instinctively before pulling my hand back. "That's it." "Mrs. Miller, when this watch came in, I noticed something unusual about it," Albert said, his voice taking on a more serious tone. "I've been in this business for 40 years, taken over from my father, who took over from his father. I've handled thousands of watches. This one has something special." "What do you mean?" I asked, confused. Albert carefully removed the watch from its box. While examining it, I discovered that this model has been modified. There's a hidden compartment in the case back. I stared at him in shock. A compartment. Frank never mentioned anything like that. It's quite cleverly done, Albert explained. Professional work, not something standard from Rolex. Someone had this custom added. My mind was spinning. What's in it? Albert looked at me with gentle eyes. That's why I haven't put this watch out for sale yet. When I found what was inside, I knew it was special. I was hoping the seller might come back for it. With practiced fingers, Albert turned the watch over and used a small tool to carefully press what looked like a normal part of the case. To my amazement, a tiny section of the back popped open, revealing a small hidden space. There are 2 items inside, Albert said. A folded note and a photograph. With trembling fingers, I accepted the tiny, carefully folded paper and even smaller photo he extracted from the compartment. The photograph was first a miniature version of a picture I knew well, Jason. At about 7 years old, sitting on Frank's shoulders at a baseball game, both of them beaming with matching smiles. Then I unfolded the note, immediately recognizing Frank's neat, precise handwriting. The paper was so small that the message was brief, but its impact was enormous. Jason, when you're ready to understand what real value means, this watch is yours. It marked my time building our family. Now it's your turn. Love always, Dad. The world around me blurred as tears filled my eyes. My legs felt suddenly weak, and Albert quickly brought a chair from behind the counter. Please sit down, Mrs. Miller, he said, guiding me to the seat. I couldn't speak. All I could do was stare at the note and photo evidence that Frank had planned all along to give the watch to Jason. He had created this secret message, this private connection between father and son, without ever telling me. Albert tactfully busied himself behind the counter, giving me a moment to collect myself. When my tears finally subsided, he offered me a tissue from a box he kept nearby. I take it you didn't know about this, he said gently. I shook my head. Frank never said a word. He must have had this done in the last year or so before he died. His heart attack was so sudden, he never got the chance to give it to Jason himself. The realization washed over me in waves. Frank had intended the watch as a legacy, a passing of the torch, and now, in the most painful irony, Jason had sold that legacy to fund a temporary escape. Mr. Thompson, I said, when I could trust my voice again, how much would it cost for me to buy back the watch? Albert closed the secret compartment and carefully returned the watch to its box. Mrs. Miller, I gave your son $3,000 for this watch. Its actual value is closer to $12,000. My heart sank. I didn't have that kind of money readily available. Seeing my expression, Albert continued, but given the circumstances, I would be willing to return it for what I paid, plus a small fee for my time. Say $3,200. You would do that? I asked, astonished by his generosity. Albert smiled. I've been in this business a long time. Most items that come through here are just things. But occasionally something comes in that isn't just a thing. It's a story, a memory, a connection. This watch belongs with your family. I don't have that much cash with me today, I admitted. The watch isn't going anywhere, Albert assured me. I won't sell it. When you're ready, come back. I thanked him profusely, but as I prepared to leave, a thought occurred to me. Mr. Thompson, would it be possible for me to have a copy of the note and photo? I don't want to remove the originals from the watch, but I would like to have them. Of course, Albert said. I have a small scanner and printer in the back. It won't take but a minute. When I finally left Thompson's pawn an hour later, I carried with me photocopies of Frank's secret message and a business card with Albert's personal number on it. The watch remained behind in its display box, but I felt lighter somehow, as if I'd recovered something even more valuable than the Rolex itself. I had found Frank's final message to his son, and with it a path forward. The drive home from Thompson's pawn felt surreal, as if I were moving through a dream. Frank's words kept repeating in my head. When you're ready to understand what real value means, this watch is yours. At what point had Frank decided Jason wasn't ready? And when had he planned to make that determination change? These questions would never have answers now, but one thing was clear: Frank had intended for Jason to have the watch. Eventually. It was meant to be an inheritance, a passage of wisdom, not just a timepiece. As I pulled into our driveway, I made a decision. I wouldn't tell Jason about the hidden message right away. The note said when you're ready, and clearly Jason wasn't ready yet. If Frank had wanted a test of character selling the watch, had certainly failed it. No Jason would need to earn this revelation. Inside the house, I went straight to Frank's office and opened the filing cabinet where he had meticulously organized our financial and personal documents. Under valuables and warranties, I found the original purchase information for the Rolex given to him by the company. But there was something else too, a small receipt I'd never noticed before, dated just 4 months before his death. Custom case modification, discreet compartment, it read. $350, paid in full. Frank had gone to a specialty jeweler in downtown Portland, apparently planning this surprise during the final months of his life. I sat in his office chair surrounded by the remnants of his organized, thoughtful existence, and felt a new wave of grief mixed with appreciation. Even at the end, he had been thinking ahead, planning for a future he wouldn't see, trying to pass wisdom to his son. That evening, I called Laura in Seattle. She answered on the second ring, the sounds of her busy household audible in the background. "Mom, how are you? Sorry about the noise, the kids are having a dinosaur battle in the living room." I smiled despite everything. "It sounds wonderful, dear. Are you able to talk for a few minutes? Something has happened." Laura must have heard the seriousness in my voice. "Hang on, let me go to the bedroom. Tom, can you watch the kids for a bit?" When she came back on the line, I told her everything about Jason selling the watch, our argument, and my discovery at the pawn shop. He did what Laura's indignation was immediate. How could he sell Dad's watch? And for a vacation? Unbelievable. "I know, honey," I said. "I'm hurt and disappointed too. But there's more to this than just Jason's poor decision." I described the hidden compartment and Frank's message. Laura's anger transformed to wonder. "Oh, Mom," she said softly. "Dad was always thinking ahead, wasn't he? Always the planner." "Yes," I agreed. "And now I need to plan too. I want to buy the watch back, but I don't think Jason should know about the message yet. He needs to earn it to show that he's ready, like your father said." Laura was quiet for a moment. "I think you're right. If you tell him now, he might feel entitled to it without understanding the responsibility that comes with it. So what's your plan?" We spent the next hour discussing options. Laura offered to help financially with buying back the watch, which touched me deeply. Together, we sketched out a rough approach. I would let Jason know I was disappointed but still loved him, set clearer boundaries, and create opportunities for him to demonstrate growth and responsibility. Over the next few days, I immersed myself in research about the watch, learning about its history and significance. I found online forums where Rolex enthusiasts shared stories and information. The more I learned, the more I appreciated Frank's pride in owning such a timepiece. It wasn't about showing off wealth, he had never cared about that. It was about craftsmanship, reliability, and enduring quality. I also started preparing for Jason's return. I cleaned Frank's office thoroughly and arranged his mementos more prominently. Photos of Frank and Jason together, fishing at baseball games, working on the car in the driveway. Little reminders of their bond. 5 days after our argument with Jason, already in Italy, according to his brief text message, I sent him an email. I kept it simple and honest. "Jason, I want you to know that while I'm deeply hurt by your decision to sell your father's watch without discussing it with me, I still love you and always will. When you return, I'd like us to talk about healthy ways forward for both of us. I realize I've perhaps held too tightly to Frank's memory, and that may have made it harder for you to process your own grief. This house is still your home, but I think we both need to establish better boundaries and expectations. Enjoy. Italy, Dad would have loved seeing it through your eyes. Love, Mom." His reply came 12 hours later. "Got your email. Trip is good. Taking lots of pictures. Back in 3 weeks." No apology, no real engagement with what I'd said. But at least it was communication. It was a start. As the days passed, I divided my time between teaching my community education classes, meeting with my grief support group, and preparing financially to buy back the watch. I withdrew money from my emergency savings and accepted Laura's generous contribution. By the time Jason was scheduled to return, I had the full amount ready. I also spent time with my grief support group, sharing the complicated emotions this situation had stirred up. Martha, a widow of 5 years who had become a dear friend, offered particular insight. Grief does strange things to families, she said during coffee after one meeting. Your son lost not just his father but his model for how to be a man. Hess floundering. Selling the watch might have been his way of rejecting the responsibility that comes with stepping into his father's shoes. I never expected him to be frank, I protested. Martha patted my hand. Of course not consciously. But expectations don't have to be spoken to be felt, and sometimes the hardest person to forgive is the one who leaves us behind. Her words stayed with me, opening a new perspective. Perhaps Jason had been angry at Frank for dying, for leaving him without guidance. Perhaps selling the watch had been an act of rebellion against that abandonment. 3 weeks after Jason left for Europe, I received another text. Landing tomorrow at 2 p.m. Could you pick me up at airport, thanks? It wasn't much, but the request for a ride was the first time since our argument that Head asked anything of me. It felt like a tiny olive branch. Of course, I replied. I'll be there. Text me when you land. That night, I stood in Frank's office looking at the photo of him and Jason at the baseball game, the same image Frank had miniaturized and hidden in the watch. Help me find the right words, I whispered to his memory. Help me reach our son. The airport was crowded with summer travelers, families returning from vacations, business people hurrying between connections. I waited at the arrivals gate, scanning the flow of passengers for Jason's familiar face. When he finally appeared, I was struck by how different he looked. Tanned from the Italian sun, he seemed somehow older, his features more defined. He spotted me and raised a hand in greeting, navigating through the crowd with his carry-on bag. Hi, Mom, he said when he reached me, leaning down for a quick, awkward hug. Welcome home, I replied, resisting the urge to straighten his rumpled shirt or comment on his need for a haircut. How was your flight? Long, he said, but the food was decent, better than American Airlines. We made small talk as we retrieved his larger suitcase and headed to the parking garage. The car ride continued in the same vein: weather, airport crowds, Italian coffee, neutral topics, safe territory. Neither of us mentioned the watch or our argument. At home, Jason carried his luggage to the basement without comment about whether he was staying permanently or just until he found his own place. I let it be, giving him space to settle in. Would you like dinner? I asked as he came back upstairs. I made your favorite lasagna. It's in the fridge, if you'd like me to heat it up. Jason hesitated, then nodded. Yeah, that would be good. Thanks. Let me grab a shower first. Over dinner, the conversation gradually warmed. Jason showed me photos on his phone of the Colosseum, the Vatican, the canals of Venice. His descriptions became more animated as he talked about the architecture and engineering he had seen. The Pantheon was incredible, Mom, he said, eyes bright with genuine enthusiasm. The dome is still the world's largest unreinforced concrete dome, and it was built almost 2,000 years ago. Dad would have lost his mind over the precision of it. He certainly would have, I agreed, pleased to hear Frank mentioned without tension. Which places do you think he would have loved most? Jason considered this, taking a bite of lasagna. The aqueducts outside Rome, definitely. And honestly, probably the smaller stuff more than the famous sites. He always appreciated practical engineering over showy monuments. That's true, I said, remembering Frank's admiration for well-designed bridges and efficient systems. He used to say, "Beauty and utility," Jason finished for me. Form follows function, but that doesn't mean it can't be beautiful too. We shared a smile of recognition, this common memory of Frank, creating a momentary bridge between us. After dinner, instead of retreating to the basement, Jason helped clear the table. As we worked side by side loading the dishwasher, I decided it was time. Jason, I'd like to show you something. Could we go to your father's office for a few minutes? A flicker of wariness crossed his face, but he nodded. Sure. Frank's office had always been a special place in our home. Even when the kids were young, they knew it as a space that commanded respect. Not because Frank forbade them from entering, but because the room somehow captured his essence, orderly, purposeful, warm. I gestured for Jason to sit in Frank's chair while I took the visitor's seat opposite the desk. On the wall behind me hung photos of Frank at various career milestones, always wearing his Rolex in the later pictures. I went to the pawn shop, I said directly, watching Jason's face. He looked down, color rising in his cheeks. I figured you might. The watch is still there. Mr. Thompson is holding it. Jason nodded but didn't speak. I want to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me, I continued. Why that watch? You could have sold other things. You could have asked me for money. Why did you choose your father's watch? Jason was quiet for so long, I thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low. I don't know. Not really. He ran a hand through his hair. I guess part of me was angry. At Dad for dying. At you for keeping everything the same like some kind of shrine. At myself for being stuck. He gestured around the office. Every time I look at his things, I feel like I'm failing him somehow. Failing him, I echoed, surprised. He was so together, Mom. He knew exactly who he was, what he wanted. He built a life, a career, a family. And look at me, Jason said bitterly. 32, divorced, living in my mom's basement, working a job I hate. The watch. It was like this symbol of everything I haven't achieved. My heart ached for him. Oh, Jason, your father was 40 before he felt established in his career. He made plenty of mistakes along the way, had plenty of doubts. You only saw the finished product, not all the years of struggle. Still, Jason insisted he wouldn't have sold a family heirloom for a vacation. No, I agreed. He wouldn't have. But he also wouldn't want you to measure your life against his. He wanted you to find your own path. I pulled out the album I'd prepared, opening it to photos of Frank in his 20s and early 30s. Look, here he is after being passed over for promotion at 28. Here he is when his first design project was rejected. Here at 30, when he considered quitting engineering altogether to open a hardware store. Jason leaned forward, examining these glimpses of his father as a younger, less certain man. I don't remember him talking about any of that, he said. By the time you were old enough to understand those struggles were behind him, I explained, but they shaped him just as your challenges are shaping you. Jason closed the album, his expression troubled. Mom, I'm sorry about the watch. I knew it was important, and I sold it anyway. It was selfish and disrespectful. The apology so long awaited washed over me like a wave. Thank you for saying that. Is there? Jason hesitated. Is there any way to get it back? I could try to earn the money? This was the opening I'd been waiting for. Actually, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. Mr. Thompson has agreed to hold the watch, but he'll need payment soon. How much? Jason asked. $3,200. Jason winced. That will take me some time to save. I have a proposal, I said carefully. I can help with part of the amount, but I'd like you to contribute too, and not just financially. I think it's time for some changes for both of us. Over the next hour, we negotiated terms. Jason would find his own apartment, establishing independence while staying in Portland. He would commit to weekly family dinners, maintaining our connection. Most importantly, he would work with a financial counselor to address his credit card debt and develop better money management skills. This isn't punishment, I assured him. It's about building the life you want one step at a time. Your father believed in you, Jason. So do I. As our conversation wound down, Jason looked more at peace than I had seen him in years. When can we get the watch back? He asked. Mr. Thompson said it's not going anywhere, I answered. We can take our time, do this right. Jason nodded thoughtfully. I think I need to earn it back. Not just pay for it, but deserve it. In that moment, I glimpsed the man Frank had seen in our son, the person he had left his message for. Jason might not be ready yet, but he was on his way. The next morning, Jason announced he had found a small apartment for rent just 10 minutes away. Within a week, he had moved out of the basement, taking only what was truly his and leaving Frank's office untouched. Our weekly dinners became a cherished ritual. Sometimes Laura and her family would join by video call, creating a bridge between our scattered family members. Jason found a new job with a construction management firm, putting his marketing skills to work in an industry adjacent to his father's. He seemed to find satisfaction in the connection, without feeling trapped by comparison. Most significantly, Jason committed to his financial recovery plan with unexpected discipline. He took on weekend work photographing properties for real estate listings, reviving his old hobby while earning extra income. Every dollar was meticulously tracked, with a growing portion set aside for reclaiming the watch. 4 months after his return from Europe, Jason called me on a Tuesday evening. Mom, he said, his voice vibrating with excitement, I did it. I have my share of the money for the watch. Can we go to Thompson's this weekend? Of course, I said, pride swelling in my chest. Saturday morning. Perfect, he agreed. And Mom, thank you for not giving up on me. As I hung up the phone, I looked at the photograph of Frank that sat on my nightstand. He made it, I whispered. He found his way. Saturday morning dawned clear and bright, a rare gift in Portland's typically rainy autumn. Jason arrived at my house early, dressed in a button-down shirt and khakis, his hair neatly trimmed. The transformation from the angry young man who had sold his father's watch wasn't just financial or logistical, it showed in his bearing, his renewed confidence. Ready, he asked as I came down the front steps. Ready, I confirmed, getting into his car. The drive downtown was filled with comfortable conversation. Jason told me about a project he was managing at work, his first solo assignment. I shared news about Laura's oldest starting kindergarten. Simple family talk, but precious in its ordinariness. Thompson's Pawn looked exactly as it had 4 months earlier. The bell above the door jingled as we entered, and Albert looked up from behind the counter. Mrs. Miller, he greeted me warmly, then turned to Jason. And you must be the son. Jason nodded, extending his hand. Jason Miller. Thank you for holding the watch for us. Albert shook Jason's hand, studying him with kind but evaluating eyes. Your mother made a compelling case. Some things are worth waiting for. While Jason and I counted out the money together, his hard-earned savings combined with my contribution, Albert went to the back room to retrieve the watch. When he returned, he placed the familiar box on the counter. Before we complete the transaction, Albert said, looking directly at Jason, I want to make sure you understand what you're buying back. This isn't just a luxury timepiece. From what your mother has told me, this watch represents your father's life, work, his values, his legacy. Are you prepared to be its guardian now? Jason's voice was steady as he answered. Yes, sir. I understand its value goes far beyond money. Albert nodded approvingly. In that case, I believe you should examine it thoroughly before leaving. A Rolex like this has many features worth appreciating. My heart raced as I realized what Albert was doing. He was creating the moment for Jason to discover Frank's message. Albert opened the box, revealing the Rolex nestled on its velvet cushion. Go ahead, he encouraged Jason. Take a good look at it. Jason carefully lifted the watch, turning it over in his hands. It's just like I remember on Dad's wrist, he said softly. Interesting construction on these models, Albert commented casually. The caseback, for instance. Very secure design. Jason continued examining the watch, but I could tell he wasn't seeing what Albert was hinting at. After a moment, the older man smiled gently. You know, Albert said, sometimes watchmakers add special features for clients. Custom modifications. May I show you something? Jason handed the watch to Albert, who deftly turned it over and used his small tool to pop open the hidden compartment. There, he said. This watch has a secret. Jason's expression transformed from confusion to wonder as Albert extracted the tiny photograph and folded note. What is this? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Perhaps you should read it, Albert suggested, handing the items to Jason. I watched as my son unfolded the note with trembling fingers, saw his eyes widen as he recognized his father's handwriting. The color drained from his face as he read the brief message. Jason, when you're ready to understand what real value means, this watch is yours. It marked my time building our family. Now it's your turn. Love always, Dad. He stared at the miniature photograph of himself on Frank's shoulders, then looked up at me with tears in his eyes. Did you know about this? He asked hoarsely. I discovered it when I first came here, I admitted, but I felt you needed to find your way to it yourself. Your father said, when you're ready, and I think he'd agree that you are now. Jason clutched the note and photo in his palm, closing his eyes briefly. When he opened them, he turned to Albert. Thank you for preserving this. I can't imagine what would have happened if you hadn't found it, if someone else had bought the watch. Albert smiled. In my business, you develop a sense for which items have stories beyond the obvious. This watch practically shouted that it had secrets to tell. After completing the transaction, Albert showed Jason how to properly close the compartment, securing Frank's message back in its hiding place. Take good care of it, he said as we prepared to leave. Both the watch and what it represents. I will, Jason promised. Outside on the sidewalk, Jason stopped and put the watch on his wrist for the first time. It looked both foreign and familiar there, Too large for his slimmer build, yet somehow right. A torch past a circle completed. That evening, Jason came to my house for dinner, bringing a bottle of wine and a small wrapped package. After we ate, he handed me the gift. "I've been thinking about legacies," he said as I opened it. "About what we leave behind and what we carry forward." Inside the box was a beautiful silver photo frame. It held a picture I'd never seen before. Frank standing on a bridge in Italy, smiling at the camera. "How?" I began, confused. "I took that with me to Europe," Jason explained. "A photo of Dad I've always kept in my wallet. When I visited the Roman aqueducts, I set it up so he could finally see them too. I took pictures at all the places he would have loved." Tears filled my eyes as I realized what this meant. Even while selling the watch, even during our worst argument, Jason had been carrying his father with him, honoring him in his own way. "Thank you," I whispered. "I've been thinking," Jason continued, "about what Dad's note meant. When you're ready to understand what real value means." I thought he was talking about being financially responsible or successful in my career. But it's more than that, isn't it? I nodded. "What do you think it means?" Jason touched the watch on his wrist thoughtfully. "I think it's about understanding that time is the real currency. How we spend our days, who we spend them with. Dad didn't value this watch because it was expensive. He valued what it represented: years of showing up, being constant, building something that lasts." Yes, I agreed. Frank understood that better than anyone. "I want to build something too," Mom, Jason said. "I'm not sure what yet, but something worthy of this watch, of his legacy." Over the next year, our family found a new rhythm. Jason flourished in his career, eventually being promoted to project manager. He started dating Sarah, a kindergarten teacher with a warm laugh and practical outlook. Laura brought the grandchildren for longer visits, filling the house with noise and movement. Frank's office gradually transformed, not into a shrine, but into a living space, where Jason would sometimes work when he visited, where the grandchildren would look through old photo albums, where memories were honored but not frozen in amber. As for the Rolex, Jason wore it only on special occasions. Laura's 40th birthday, his one-year anniversary with Sarah, the groundbreaking ceremony for his first major construction project. The rest of the time, he kept it in the original display case in his apartment. On the 3rd anniversary of our retrieving the watch from Thompson's pawn, Jason invited me to dinner at his place. Sarah was there, and Laura and her family joined by video call. After dessert, Jason stood and raised his glass. 3 years ago today, I learned an important lesson about value, about legacy, and about second chances, he said. I wanted to gather everyone who matters most to me to say thank you for your patience, your forgiveness, and your love. He looked directly at me. Mom, you could have given up on me when I betrayed your trust. Instead, you showed me how to make things right. That's a lesson I'll carry forward. Later, as I prepared to leave, Jason walked me to my car. The Rolex gleamed on his wrist in the porch light. You know, he said, sometimes I think about how differently things might have turned out. If Albert hadn't discovered Dad's message, if you hadn't been determined to see the watch one more time. But we did find it, I reminded him. That's what matters. Jason nodded. I think that's what Dad meant about value. Not the price of things, but their meaning. Not what we lose, but what we find in the process of losing and recovering. As I drove home that night, I felt Frank's presence more strongly than I had in years. Not as a painful absence, but as a continuing influence. Through the watch, through his hidden message, he had reached across time to guide our family when we needed it most. The greatest legacy isn't in the objects we leave behind, but in the values that outlive us, the love that continues to shape those who remain. Sometimes the most precious things are hidden in plain sight, waiting for us to be ready to truly see them. If you've ever discovered an unexpected message from someone who's gone, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Was there ever a moment when an object revealed its deeper meaning to you? Like this video, if you believe some things are worth more than their price tag. Subscribe if you want more stories about family forgiveness and finding your way back to what matters. Thank you for listening. And remember, the most valuable inheritance isn't something you can wear on your wrist, but what you carry in your heart.